This was kind of a lucky one for me because they came to me with a thing that I was going to say yes to right away. So I think it would have been one of those roles that anybody would have sort of fought for and sort of auditioned for and, you know, really went to bat for. And I was very fortunate that they came to me. He was so influential on so many different writers, and you know, he's almost become a caricature or a brand. You know, he's gone beyond icon into sort of this sort of archetype figure in people's consciousness. But he's definitely, you know, the godfather of goth. He was sort of a professional intellectual, and he was a bit of a rock star because his poem, The Raven, became famous and was printed all over the world, but since there was no copyright, he didn't get any money for it. So he lived in a hovel. He was poor his entire life, but he was famous. And then he got invited to the White House, but got drunk and caused a scene at the White House. I mean, he was just, you know, he was like a Baudelaire or something. He was one of these creatures who could be at the highest, loftiest poetic place, and then he could just be in the gutter with, you know, the street dregs and the slugs. And he was sort of would breeze in and out of both worlds. So he's a fantastic character to play. You know, if a movie's cast well, a lot of things take care of themselves. Because like Alice is, you know, she's sort of ultra charming, beautiful, and she's aristocratic, but, you know, she has a secret. You know, that's what makes her interesting to watch. She's got some secrets in there, and you know, Luke is very, he's a very, you know, he sort of exudes sort of dignity and decency, and yet he's not a pushover, and he's got real substance, and Brendan's just a big Irish monster. He's a younger detective. He's kind of ambitious, you know, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. The perfect person for Poe to skewer. But, you know, he ends up earning his respect after a while, and they end up going on a journey together. We always had his work to go back to, and since the movie had to really reflect the spirit of this guy's work from a literary point of view, we could always refer back to that and have the style and the aesthetic and the form always be true to the source. So we had that way to talk about it. And so I'd say, oh, I really want him to say this. And he was like, what does that mean? I go, it's from one of his letters, look. All right. He's a sharp guy, so he knew I had to get into some weird headspaces, so he sort of was probably protective and took care of me that way. The studios do these things where they ask these branding questions. They say, they go to Orange County and, you know, 5 other cities, and they go, do you guys know about, you know, Alice Eve? And then, you know, 42% say yes, or John Cusack, and 61% say yes, or whatever it is. But Poe had 96% people knew about him. Young, old, every demographic. So he's definitely in the collective conscience of people.
The whole premise of the film is based around his most famous works, the gory ones, the murder stories, and basically what each of his stories inspires a serial killer to murder, inspired by the imagination of Poe and his works, quite accurately. The first time you meet Fields, he's at a crime scene, and he looks around this crime scene and realizes that there's something that's ringing a bell in his head. He's not entirely sure why, but the crime scene sounds familiar, looks familiar. There's something weird about it. And so he goes investigating and researching and realizes it's actually a story that was printed, which was one of Poe's works. It's an interesting scenario when they first meet because he can't really work Poe out. Because Fields is very methodical. He's very analytical, slight OCD, and Poe is basically the opposite. We know that Emily's life is in the balance, and I don't think the killer would think twice about killing her, but he loves the fact that we're all completely just desperate to work out, second guess him before he gets to the next one, you know. He's sort of the father of science fiction and murder novels and murder fiction and all that, and I can see that John obviously likes Poe, and you can see he loves playing him, and it's fantastic to play off him because he stays in character quite a lot, and it's really interesting to play off that. I never think it's John Cusack. I always think it's Edgar Allan Poe. It's great. It's fantastic, and it's a real privilege to be playing against somebody like John, who is completely flawless in his performance, and it's really enjoyable. He, as a director, he provides you with a very free ability. He gives you a freedom on set. He allows you to just go with what you've got, and then he just tweaks it.
She's kind of an amalgamation of all the characters that he was with in his life. He was a real lover, Poe, but he wasn't like a Lothario. He liked to get married and then have a muse, you know? So I think that's quite sweet, really, but he did it with a lot of women. And at one time he was asking 2 women to marry him at the same time. Poe's a genius. You know, that's why there's a movie about him. I think anyone would be and is attracted to genius, and you know, talent's a great aphrodisiac, and I think it's just the same for Emily. I don't think she sees anything else. Poe is difficult with her father and makes that difficult for her, and Hamilton's very possessive over her and has been used to having her by his side. Poe wrote very dark, very imaginative stories about descent into madness, being buried alive, you know, blindness, all sorts of horrific things that you can imagine sort of slowly happening to someone. And what happened is these stories were reimagined and then put into practice on his love. His famous poem, The Raven, is about his descent into madness, so that's paralleled in, you know, what happens to Poe's character. But I think there's a sort of plethora of short stories that the writers have taken elements from to create what happens in the film. John was great as Poe, really wonderful, and he brought a lot of lyricism to the language as well, which would have been typical, I think, of a poet, to have a melody to his language and a flair, and he brought that, and he really inhabited that kind of neurotic, alcoholic man, you know. The stance of the period, and it's very, you know, it's a lot more structured than our clothes, and a lot more structured in speech and in manner. And then we learnt to waltz, John and I, the Viennese waltz. So there's been a lot of stuff I've learned.